try that again. Tansei. Tawau. I love that word because it doesn't just mean welcome, it means there is room here. So hopefully we do have some people who have joined us on Zoom as well, so welcome to you as well. And I'm going to ask Carl, here you are, Carl, to do our land acknowledgement to start.
As we meet tonight in Beaver Hills House, our land acknowledgement is one that affects all of us here. Some support here. First, we recognize that we are a party to Treaty 6. Second, we recognize that the Papaschase First Nation is also a party to Treaty 6. And third, we recognize that Reserve IR 136 was originally set aside for the Papaschase First Nation as a part of the Treaty 6 agreement. However, this part of Treaty 6 was never fulfilled. And this is the very land on which we are meeting tonight here at Westwood. So this is something that affects all of us. And it is in recognition of this very real and personal relationship that we acknowledge that we have a responsibility to honor this history and to find ways in which we can support and cooperate with the Papaschase First Nation in addressing this miscarriage of justice.
Thank you. So my name is Brenda, and I'm your host for this evening. And we're so glad that you could be here with us this evening. And just one other announcement is that the next in this series is planned for September 20th, and we will be looking forward to that. We haven't got the speaker all lined up yet, but we will send out information to those who have attended as soon as we have that information. And we hope that we'll see you here again with a lot more people. And I don't know, it's so beautiful because we have light tonight. This is the first time that we've had an evening where we could get together, and it still has light outside. Isn't that wonderful? And I know we're competing with the Oilers tonight and the good weather and all that stuff. So thankfully, though, it's on Zoom, and if you have friends who missed it, they'll be able to pick it up on the Westwood website later as well. So, yeah, I'll just continue on. So, Darlene, thank you so much for being here. And on behalf of the community, I'd like to offer you this sage.
Well, Tawau, welcome. I'm honored to be here tonight to speak with you about some of the journeys that we've been through as an unrecognized First Nation. The struggles with identity is a huge one. And when President Lorian Kennedy asked me to speak, because I hadn't planned on doing so, and this was last year already, I didn't quite know what it was that we were going to speak about or what I should speak about. And I know that the speakers here are quite stellar. So I feel as though I'm a little bit intimidated tonight to speak with you all. I'd like to keep it very common sense, though, so that there's understanding. And I think I look back on what happened last year and what we've been through as a group and a community. And I was stopped from talking last year. And looking back on that now, I don't think I was ready at that time. So things happen for a reason. And that's how I look at it. And when given the opportunity again, asked again, I thought, well, I should follow through. So I put together a presentation tonight, though. As per Ms. Kennedy's suggestion, is that we put together some pictures and talk a little bit about how I find myself in this position. Because I've asked that many times, what's happening and how did this happen? And I think it all started out with identity issues, and I'd like to, for us to take a look at this slide. That's our Papaschase teepee. It's like 35 feet tall. And what I do in this presentation is essentially talk about our Indigenous existence and the Canadian polity. And I'm really careful about the words that I use, because we can be talking about the Canadian polity or the governance structure as how we exist within that structure, with that structure, and there's a lot of people who think we should exist without that structure. And I like how, the teepee signifies a home for us. But so does our logo, which you'll see, and I don't want to keep looking back at the slide and putting my back to you. So I'll ask you to go to the next slide. And that slide is about the Canadian polity, or what is a polity. And basically it's a system of governance. It's based on certain rules. It's based on policies. It's based on how we govern ourselves. It could be a corporate body. And that's what we are. So to introduce myself, and how I am in the position of being the chief of the Papaschase First Nation number 136 Association. I started out in 2019, actually, with a group of people who wanted to organize, and they were descendants. They wanted to organize again in the form of an association. And because we do have a history as descendants of the Papaschase Indian Band, which was an Indian band located on the south side of Edmonton. They wanted to organize and assert our existence in a way that would provide responsible governance to descendants of the Papaschase Indian Band. And I started out as the lawyer, organizing that on behalf of the descendants, and being a descendant myself, I readily volunteered. I had been involved with the descendants of the Papaschase Indian Band since, I'd say, the mid-1990s, and in 2001, when I was a student at law, I got an injunction against EPCOR on a without notice basis, and based on the findings of human remains that were buried at the Rosedale Flats. I am a descendant of two of the original homestead families that were at that location. And you are as well. And these families had to sign a quitclaim to a man named Donald Ross, and we all know why that area is named Rosedale Flats. Even though we had opened the land, our families had opened the land, and we had homesteads there. I descend from Headman Bateau of the Papaschase Indian Band. He is the brother of Chief Papaschase. And when we did our DNA tests, because we have to, identity is very important with our organization. We started out with approximately, a little over 1,300 declared descendants, and we had to move beyond the declarations. We had to go into verification of descendancy. And right now, I can confirm we have 125 confirmed descendants, and we have over 300 in queue to be verified. So we are making progress, but this is the verification process that we go through. And last year I took a DNA test with other descendants of Chief Papaschase, George Quinn and Victor Coutre. We compared our DNA, and our common ancestor is the mother of Chief Papaschase, so rightly so, that's how it should be. But it's, you don't want to find out otherwise, right? After all this, so anyway, that's, we were like, phew. But that all worked out. But if we want others to do the same, we kind of have to set a precedent and do that ourselves. And so we've done that. So I don't know if you could read this. It's very small handwriting, printing. But I think when you're talking about Indigenous people and the polity, and I've got a degree in philosophy, and I'm also a lawyer, but I would say that this, with Indigenous peoples and their existence with this country, you're looking at three polities that we have to contend with, and that's the imperial government, the Dominion of Canada, and then our own tribal law, which Cree law is wahkohtowin. And John Burroughs, he's a legal scholar, and his position is that the Constitution of Canada recognizes three governments. That would be the common law, the civil law, and Indigenous law. And really coming from an non-status, meaning that we're not registered under the Indian Act. We are a landless band that entered Treaty Number 6, an adhesion to Treaty 6 in 1877. Chief Papaschase was one of the signatories of that adhesion, along with the Alexander Band Chief and Alexis Band Chief. And that was at the legislature grounds over here. In that context, knowing that we descend from treaty, we are recognized under the Constitution of Canada as a protected or a recognized group or recognized community, a recognized identity, and that would fall under Section 91 sub 24, which recognizes Indian Métis non-status, or Indian Métis and Inuit, and then you have your Section 35, which upholds those rights. I hope I'm not talking too fast because I'm sort of skirting around, trying to find my comfort level here with this presentation, because there's so much to talk about when it comes to Indigenous realities, and to relate that to a non-status, unrecognized position is difficult. It's a very uphill battle. It's an open area of law where there are not a whole lot of rules in place. It's ripe for abuse, and knowing that going into it, it's really important to do the right thing by it. So that being said, I'd like to move on to the next slide. You'll notice that this is so small, this printing. I'll know better next time. But I go into the Imperial Government Constitution Act of 1867, and this act arose as a result of the Imperial Government wanting to recognize 4 provinces as a confederation. They wanted to recognize Upper Canada, Lower Canada, and then they wanted to bring in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. So those were the 4 original provinces of Canada that entered into a Dominion of Canada. And the reason why this was done with the Imperial government is because they wanted to effect a transfer of Rupert's Land, which was an exclusive trade and commerce license that was granted to the Hudson's Bay Company. And seeing that there were settlers that were breaking the land and engaging with Hudson's Bay Company forts, and knowing that they had this exclusivity of trade, it came to the point where there was a growing sentiment against the Hudson's Bay Company and its laws, because when you think about it, when you have a group of people together, there has to be some laws that are set down with regards to how those settlers are going to behave amongst each other. And there were property rights that were showing up at that time. And I'm talking in particular about the Red River Colony, which was a real hotbed of activity at that time. And there were a number of settlers in the Red River Colony. They're your French half-breeds, your English and Scottish. And you had this mix, and there were a few Canadians in there. The reason why the Dominion of Canada, or the Imperial government, wanted to recognize these provinces as Canada was because they wanted to effect that transfer to Canada. And it was getting high time for that. There was a lot of unrest in the Red River, and there was a growing disrespect for the Hudson's Bay Company's jurisdiction and its laws. It was a company, it wasn't a government. And so that being said about that, we find ourselves as descendants of people who entered treaty with the Crown in a unique position, because we did not enter Confederation. We did not enter into this Dominion of Canada agreement. The Métis at the Red River did. They entered into Confederation through the Manitoba Act. So that being said, we'll move on. So you have your Rupert's Land transfer, which there's a lot of controversy over the legality of, does this grant government and control over a territory. And I think some of the unrest that was around Red River at that time was based on legitimate reasons of protection of their rights at that time. You know, they looked at Canada as a foreign government coming into their territory and putting down rules for them. And it was Lorian who, with his council, wrote the Bill of Rights to protect those people's interests. And you can't blame them for doing that. There were some mistakes made along the way, I would submit, but we're only human. And I think that at the end of the day, they were able to effectively assert their rights, but whether their rights were upheld or not is another story. And then we find now we're going to be going into the treaty situations. So yes, and I do mention it was a controversial purchase as well, because you purchase a charter that grants you jurisdiction over an immense portion of territory for what could be called a pittance. And at that time, and especially at that time as well, and the money that came for that purchase came from a loan from the imperial government. So you have this interaction of the imperial government in the territories that were asserted by the Dominion of Canada, and then you have these settlers in this community who are wanting to assert their own existence as a group or a government, or however they wanted to be known as. And the government at the time, which a Hudson's Bay Company put down, was called the Council of Assiniboia, and it was representative of all the groups, but the Hudson's Bay Company was slowly losing the respect of the local settlers there. And so just to move on from that, we've got, in the next slide, yes, so in Canada, we're taught as lawyers that the Constitution is a living tree. So in other words, you know, you look at the history of this confederation and you see that the living tree, it's subject to change, it's subject to growth. And I find it to be a really interesting analogy, because we want to resort to things that are living and doing well in the state of nature. And I can't help but see elements of nature even in our agreements with the Crown. We've got the river, the grass, we've got elements of nature, as though what we're doing is natural and it's ordained by whatever law of nature is governing this relationship at the time. So I thought this was a pretty neat image, because the Constitution is a living tree, and this is why I would say this is that it is important to understand that when you're dealing with the Constitution of Canada, you have very different attitudes towards it. As an Indigenous people, we can look at the Constitution as something that really shouldn't even be applying to us. And we can look at the Constitution as something that we fall within. And the Constitution, to be clear, does not grant us any rights. It recognizes our existing rights. And that needs to really be made clear with First Nations and people, because there's a real misunderstanding that because this act acknowledges our existence, that means we fall into that act. And it's important that we understand that that's not what that act is doing. But sometimes the interpretation of it, though, can lead to that misapprehension. So I'm not going to be talking about the application of it. I'm going to keep this pretty straightforward in terms of how do we come about to who we are and where we are today as an unrecognized landless band. So under this act, we also have the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, Section 35 and Section 25 apply to us. So this is something, and I hate to say apply to us, but it's something that's in there that applies, that recognizes or that affirms our existence, I think might be the better way to describe it. But it also gives jurisdiction to the federal government to deal with us, not the provinces. So if we go to the next slide, the distribution of legislative powers, we all know what that is, and right now we have this thing going on with our province of Alberta and the federal government based on this division of powers. Let's go to the one that applies to us, though, is that Indians and lands reserved for the Indians are the powers of the Parliament of Canada. to deal with matters, to deal with these matters. And this is where a lot of problems arise because First Nations need roads, they need water. And whose jurisdiction is that? There's the municipalities. Is that their jurisdiction? No, it isn't their jurisdiction. So they've got their own, recognized First Nations have their own issues to deal with. But if we move on from there, so keeping this in mind in the context of this, if we go to the next slide, Section 25 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, Aboriginal rights and freedoms are not affected by the Charter. The guarantee in this Charter of certain rights and freedoms shall not be construed as to abrogate or derogate from any Aboriginal treaty or other rights or freedoms that pertain to the Aboriginal peoples of Canada. Peoples is the word that's used under international law. Peoples have the right to self-determination under Section 1 of the, I believe it's this. I knew this at one time offhand, but there is a recognition that all peoples have the right to self-determination. So for the word peoples, it's not a misspelling, it's intentional. If we could move on from that, and the recognition of existing Aboriginal and treaty rights. So this includes non-status Indians. It doesn't say status Indians being recognized under the Indian Act. It applies to Indians. And then you have your Inuit people and your Métis people. And so we can move on from that. And Article 13 of the UNDRIP, which Canada recently is a signatory to the UNDRIP, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. In particular, under Article 13, there's a provision that states that Indigenous peoples have the right to revitalize, use, develop, and transmit to future generations their histories, languages, oral traditions, philosophies, writing systems, and literatures, and to designate and retain their own names for communities, places, and persons. So here we are, the Papaschase First Nation number 136 Association, and we have our own polity. Now, what is our responsibility with regards to that? So we move on. And of course, it's about identifying what our languages are and what our traditions are. And that's the work that's ahead of us. Because our languages and traditions have been squashed under the Indian Act by mechanisms that were acts of genocide, I would submit. My mother went through residential school. There she is. We're at one of our events. And we had a family band growing up. And the reason why I bring this up is because we're an Indigenous family in Canada. And I always knew we were Indigenous. I mean, I got to look at my mom, we had to know that. But in these pictures, there are elements of Canadian culture that are really coming through strongly, but we always knew we were Indigenous. The fourth generation band, we called ourselves that because we knew we were 4 generations from our Papaschase Indian band. There was a reason why we called ourselves that, and we had Woodpecker Productions. I mean, we always knew that we were, I would back up and say, when I say we, us children knew. My mother did not. And because she went through residential school, she was not informed about who she was. And so you will find that with non-status bands or unrecognized bands, such as the Papaschase who lost their reserve, us being the first ones, in fact, through provisions that were put in the Indian Act, the script provision, Section 13, amended to Section 14. And there's so much information bubbling around in my head about this, but I will slow it down. There's a question in your mind as a child growing up, well, how the heck did this happen to us? Where is the band now and what happened? Mom did not know though, so we ended up in Fish and Lake, Métis settlement. The Quinn family, who's also from the Papaschase Indian band, ended up in Kikino, so we call it a diasporic peoples. That's what we are, we're all over the place. My dad, it's in the picture there, and that's a family picture we took while we were living in Bonnyville in the 80s. Dad is non-Indigenous, so and he actually identifies as a Messianic Jew. His mother was Jewish. How do you reconcile all of these realities? His identity. becomes very convoluted and confusing. And my dad actually comes from an adopted family. He was adopted by the St. Jeans. And growing up, I really did not like that name because to me, it never felt like my name. And my mom's a Quinn-Gladu. That's her maiden name. And so I've decided I'm going to take my birth name as my mother's. That's my blood. And that's what compels me to do what I do today, is trying to understand how did my mother get to her place where she was at, and how to reconcile our identities with not having our band, and recognizing that others have their bands, and also having to deal with Métis identity, because that Métis identity it has a component in it which has since developed to include self-identification. And if you don't self-identify as a Métis, you can't be considered a Métis, right? It's part of the definition. I thought I had been a Métis. I say that in my book because my mom found herself at Fish and Lake Métis settlement. I mean, I'm obviously mixed, right? I just assumed the default definition, and looking more into our background, realizing that we descend from treaty peoples, Métis do not. So there's a real distinct cultural, collective, polity history that goes to identity. And so I no longer identify as that, obviously. But here we are. There's my great uncle George, my mom's uncle. He's since passed away, George Gladu. He's a descendant of Bateau. So we had a family band again. We did a lot of Indigenous gigs. Samson, we went to do Métis events and everything, and it was good. There's my family, my Cookham and my mom. My mom got separated from her Cookham, and I'll explain in the next slide what happened if we can move on. Briefly, I mean, you've got your residential school, your Indian Act, and then you've got a provincial children's services body. Without providing too much detail, my mom did go through that. That was her identity card. There was my Auntie Nancy's identity card. And the reason why this happened is because my grandfather, Albert, was dying, and he's a descendant of Alexander. He's a child of Alexander, a treaty child who we're fighting for right now in the Federal Court of Appeal, because the treaty children were included in the script taking of their parents. And you may or may not be aware, but the provision in the Indian Act, which states that any half-breed who is entered treaty can take script. So he was not born a half-breed. He was born a treaty Indian, Alexander. He was 16 months old when his dad, Bateau, took script in 1886. In 1888, the Indian Act was amended to say, oh, and your taking of script will include your minor children. This happened 2 years after the fact. So our argument, we're seeking a declaration in the Federal Court of Appeal that it was against we're seeking to amend our statement and claim to seek a declaration that it was against the honor of the Crown to automatically include the treaty children, the minor treaty children of the Indian band in the script taking of their parents. And we are also, our representative people doing that is George Frank Quinn, who descends from Joseph. He had just turned 18 years of age when he took script, and the age of majority at that time was 21. And every age provision in the Indian Act was 21 to have any decision-making power over anything significant. And the other provision is basically that my ancestor, who's represented by Clifford Gladu, he was 16 months old, and he was born a treaty Indian. So how could he have even qualified for that provision? And so Mom was brought to residential school in Gruard. Grandpa was only 31 years old when he died of TB at the Charles Council. And there's a picture from the Gruard school that I got from my Auntie Elizabeth, who since passed away, and I can't see her in that picture, but that is from the school. My mom is in that really blurry picture on the right. She's in the middle there as a little girl. And but this is pictures that I've had to try to retrieve through the families. Really difficult to do, but it's the best that I could gather from that situation. And so that's basically my background. And Mom having to deal with the psychological stuff that comes from being raised in that environment as well. Mom had broken bones, and I can't speak on behalf of my mom, and I don't mean to, because she tried to keep a lot of this away from us, but of course there was sexual abuse, and I think one of the stories that she wouldn't mind me sharing with her, with you, is that, you know, the nun would tell her she was sick, go to bed, and she's a young girl here, like she's just a little girl up front there. She was told to go to bed, you're sick, and no, I'm not, yes, you are. And she went to bed anyway, and when she went to bed, next thing she hears footsteps coming up, and she looks outside the covers, and then there's some black shoes there and a robe there sitting there, and she doesn't remember anything else. She blacked out, she says. She doesn't like sharing these stories, but it makes me cry. Like it doesn't, you know, it doesn't make you cry, it just makes you kind of think, okay, that's pretty sick. You know, how safe would she have been growing up in her community versus that? And then there was a little baby girl named Mary Ann who they never saw again. She was brought there too. So the 4 girls were brought there. One, they never saw ever again. After they arrived, they knew that she arrived there, but they never saw her again. And so this is part of, my mom has just blanked this out. She doesn't blank it out, she knows about it, but she says, I'm a survivor, I don't dwell on that. I move on, I don't dwell on it. So we move on. I mean, and as being legally trained, I'm wondering why, you know, there's things in my life that are happening that don't make sense, or I'm acting out, or whatever I'm up to. What is the cause of that, or where does that come from? Not to blame that situation, but to understand that dealing with a parent who comes from that, who didn't become an alcoholic at all, thank God, because the men that she went into foster care with, she asserts, and I'm not going to name names here, but of course I wouldn't, but there were some foster homes where the men raped her while they had been drinking. And so she hates alcohol. She hates it. Whether that was a good thing or not, I don't know. But there were other things that she really has phobias, hate about. So there's my mom. Yeah, so she does all the fun stuff, I like to say, with us. You know, she loves Mayor Sohi. And there's Cliff Gladu. He's the one who told my mom about her background. She went to residential school. He found her at my parents' dry cleaners in Edmonton here and told her, cousin, we're from this. And after that, my dad was the one who came home and said, hey, your mom is from this Indian band. And I was about 9 years old at the time. And I'm thinking, well, okay, so why aren't we still from that? Like, where's my mom? What's going on with this situation? He shouldn't have said you should have been a princess, because that really got me thinking, well, how come I'm not, you know, because my dad was so enthusiastic about this. So I've been kind of knowing about this all my life, but not really digging too much into, just having an inquisitive mind about, okay, there's something happened here. Mom today in Fish and Lake, and then there's her hanging around with my cousin Carrie and my mom, Auntie Nancy's, or my Auntie Liz's daughter. And they just have, you know, 50-50 tickets. She just shows up with the fun stuff, and that's fine. So I wanted to just tie in a little bit about, and my dad was instrumental in finding her mother too, Dorothy Collins, at Elizabeth Colony, Dorothy Collins Pâhpâhtêw. And then just finding out the history of that. The Pâhpâhtêws, of course, are descendants of Chief Ermineskin. But the Pâhpâhtêw was their civil name. That is another branch, though, that this is not for the purposes of what we're talking about here, but I call it the discovery of a community, because she finally had a connection. And so did I. So did we. We kind of knew, okay, this is where mom's from. We'll move on to the next slide. So having to put together this community, that's our logo, is a woodpecker on a log, meaning we have no home. Woodpecker is Chief Papaschase. And, you know, just gathering and expressing our culture. And with the help of the Louis Bull tribe and partners like that, we are able to reconstruct our community. And it feels real to me. This is my home. This is where I belong. And things make sense from that perspective. They make sense now to me. And so when I found myself in this situation, there's Mom over there, there's George Quinn. Yeah, there's young children from the drumming group put on a show for us, and it was so good. Anyway, this is something that we're doing again this summer. Yeah, we have our cultural camps going on again now, and that's a very refreshing. It makes sense. I don't know how to describe it. It goes to identity. It goes to your soul, like you said about the food. But this is something that is nourishing for us. Yeah, and the UNDRIP talks about this reconnection, right? So moving on from that, that's where our reserve was as a band when we entered treaty. We were given treaty land entitlement. That was our surveyed reserve. But we had our traditional territory was in the two hills, and it was just northwest of that square. And that surveyed area was actually went through half of our traditional territory. Now, what had happened at that time was we had women in our band who were on the treaty pay list, and they continued on the treaty pay list, of course, after the taking of treaty. And it was Chief Papachase's position that these women be included in the band. It was in the better estimation of the Dominion of Canada, who was an agent of the Crown. We entered into treaty with the Crown, not the Dominion of Canada. That it was in their better estimation that they would exclude these women from our band, which effectively shrunk the size of our treaty land entitlement because it was based on a formula. And so the lesser amount of people, the lesser area of the reserve, right? And just to add insult to injury, they went right through our two hills. They went right through it. And that's the Southgate area. That's this area actually right here. And there were two hills here in a lake at one time, and that's been obliterated. But that's the municipal boundaries. And I like to say the city of Edmonton occupies our reserve. Yeah, so we can move on from that. The next slide, yeah. That's just my history with this. And what had happened was there's Darlene Wabiska, who was the president of the association at that time in 2001. And there's me as a law student, and we went without notice to EPCOR and got an injunction because Darlene Wabiska told me this has got to stop, my girl. And I thought, well, that means injunction. So went in there and got an injunction, and they were dealing with us at that time, EPCOR, the Energy and Utilities Board as it was known then. That area is a very sacred spot to Indigenous people. It was our former recreation grounds. It was also the area of the Fort Edmonton and their historic Fort Edmonton Cemetery. And so the people would bury their bones around that, or they're dead. They bury their dead around that. And of course, bones are, not restricted to the actual size of the Fort Cemetery. There were bones being found in other places. Very sacred area, and of course, very, very politically potent time. And nobody likes surprises. And I had a recent discussion with EPCOR that they're doing things differently these days. They are going to be excavating, though, for a flood mitigation wall. And they're consulting with a number of First Nations, including us. And they're very aware of that area. And it's nice, it's good to see that they're paying attention. But I like to call them the people who work with the water. And one of the elders called them that. And it's true, our water needs to be purified now. It needs to be treated. Gone are the days where we can just go into the river and just start drinking. We need purified water. And the First Nations who were there and the Métis representatives were discussing, water, how you can't even jump into a lake without getting hives for the most part. I mean, it needs to be treated when at one time we could. But anyway, it's water is water, land. These are all elements that speak about our relationship and our existence. And as a person who has a degree in philosophy, I like to say, I like Descartes, René Descartes. He says, I think, therefore I am, as a theory of existence. Just because you think, therefore you exist. But according to the wahkohtowin law, it's I relate, therefore I am. So you have, if we're in relationship with Earth, we're in relationship with our bodies, with ourselves, we are in relationship with others. Laws spring from that. Laws of existence spring from that. And so do values spring from that relationship. So, and this is why relationship and wahkohtowin, our kinship law, our Cree law, is so important, and the responsibility is on us to understand what that is. Jimmy O'Cheese told me at a pipe ceremony in the Beaver Hills Biosphere, which is the Beaver Hills territory, which Jean is from, the County of Strathcona area, that the pipe is our constitution. And then he said, "What are you doing about that?" Well, I don't know enough. I honestly, we got an operations manual, and I would never, ever think that we were worthy to call it a governance manual yet, because we are working with the Societies Act, and that's how we are within Canada. It's an example how we have to work with realities within Canada, asserting our existence with Canada. It's a struggle. It's not an easy road at all. And I have to say, sometimes we have to take a look at, I've taken a look at how the MNA has asserted itself, and I've learned from that how to go about asserting our existence as a non-status band. But we've had to learn as to how you go about practically existing in this legal structure that's around us. But while we got this structure, this polity or this organization, the more we put of our own law into it, the more we become a polity, or a more credible polity. So moving on from that, so we look at it as a customary authority to organize. So going back to that concept of what gives us the right to do what we're doing. And I want to tell you that it's very clear that this was a movement by descendants. We gathered in Musquatchie, I think it was Ermineskin. I got to get this right. We gathered in Musquatchie's Ermineskin First Nation in 2019, 3 times over a period of 6 weeks, and we have records of the amount of people that gathered. And we asserted our right to exist as a collective body, and I was told to put the association back in place and to put some bylaws in place. And that's what I went about doing for them. And George Quinn there is speaking. Our elders are sitting down. We held pipe ceremony with Chief Papaschase's pipe, held by the pipe carrier Floyd Quinn, who is now passed away. And Floyd Quinn's right there. The men conduct the pipe ceremony. When I attended the other pipe ceremony, I wasn't allowed to smoke the pipe. But I served them sandwiches, and to me that was good. That was okay. Our men need to be respected and valued as well for what they have, and that was all right. And I learned that to be more humble, it's a very different way of living. That having to respect others and yourself, the arrogance that comes from whatever we're taught out there, and especially being trained as a lawyer, it really teaches you, this journey really teaches you to listen to the elders, to listen to the women, to listen to the men, and to you really know you don't know it all. And especially when it comes to wahkohtowin, it's going to be up to us to bring that into a format that we can function with. And I'm going to go into that. What is that law? I know a little bit, but then I've tapped into that a little bit, but I really believe in that. You exist because you relate, and that is the key to life. So if we move on, and that's a human concept. So descendancy, verification, and membership. So here we go about verifying descendancy, and there's our form. There's our application form. Looks kind of familiar with but I mean, it's a tree. And so we had our genealogists develop this, respecting the Privacy Act legislation, again, dealing in Canada. But we have to look at it as dealing with Canada, because there are things that are in this law that are worthy. And because we entered a peace and friendship treaty I believe we're entitled to draw upon strengths that are in the common law, or the civil law as you would have it, because we entered into that agreement. We agreed to work with, in relationship with, but we don't exist within it. We are asserting our own identity through this. And that's why it's so difficult for a lot of people to understand or reconcile what is it that allows Indigenous peoples to express their, sovereignty in Canada. But it's not in Canada, it's with Canada. And that needs to be understood. There are First Nations who believe that we should exist without Canada. I can't look at it that way because of our treaty. We enter treaty, peace and friendship. We can't go back in time and undo that relationship. That relationship is important. It has meaning, and it's our job to uphold that relationship and honor that relationship. Whether Canada honored it or not is another story, of course. And if we move on from that, the Indigenous existence with Canada, so we see these existences coming together in union. And I like the concept of the river. How do we reconcile the existence of tribal communities and the existence of Canada, the Dominion of Canada? And how do we exist as a sovereign nation and relate to the Dominion of Canada? There's a lot of work on our end that needs to get done. And sovereignty is an assertion under the universal law, international law. However, it's incumbent on us to have these structures, or to have the institutional capacity to assert that sovereignty. That's up to us to do that, which makes it really difficult when you have no money. You need to be able to have resources, right? So there's so many practical obstacles. And a part of this assertion has to do with other peoples who are descendants asserting that same right. Now, how we look at it, we look at it as in this way. We say, well, under the UNDRIP, there is no right to exclusivity. So if you have a number of different groups asserting that Article 13 right, then that doesn't mean that only one group gets to assert that to the exclusion or the extinction of another group. And when you take a look at it in that context, neither does our wahkohtowin. Our Cree law does not say exclusion. However, it says we have to work together. If there are more than one group, the elders have said that back in the 90s, when this was happening as well, we have to work together. So why are we not working together? Well, it's because of this. This is the first thing you have to do. This is part of our responsibility. We have to reconstruct our identities here, and we have to have that in place. And that's just the way it goes. And that's part of the journey because of the genocide that took place through that Indian Act, where, if we can move on to the next slide there, where, and I taught, well, okay, this is about peace and friendship, but the next slide talks about, if we could go to the next slide, it talks about, and it talks about the Indian Act being the only piece of legislation in the world which governs a race. It still does today. The Dominion of Canada overstepped its respect of our boundaries. There's a peace and friendship treaty, but that didn't give the Dominion of Canada the right to start defining who we are. That's not a healthy relationship. That is not a respectful relationship, the way the Dominion of Canada has interpreted that relationship. And if you take a look at this, is a classic letter. I don't know how I came across it. It was probably on Facebook or something, social media, but it does point out something, that it is purported to be a letter from Indian Affairs saying that, oh, okay, dear Madame, you married a non-Indian, therefore you are a white woman. I mean, this and yet you became a white woman. that's the attitude. Now, they've since finessed it up a bit. They've included and corrected the sexism. Yeah. Joseph Daigneault could have even been a Métis person. But that was how it was interpreted. If you were not registered under that Indian Act, you were not recognized as even being Indian. So, but to say you became a white woman. So, I mean, and this is pretty straightforward stuff, right? And this is what happened. That's why we have Edmonton stragglers. They were called stragglers because these women were thrown off of the band. We represent them too, because George Quinn in particular, descendant of Chief Papaschase, said Chief Papaschase wanted the stragglers in the band. And it was the Indian agent who called them stragglers. So we recognize those descendants as well because they showed up on our treaty pay list for the Papaschase Indian band. So this is a reality that this is 1945. It's an Indian agent who wrote it. I don't deny the verity of it. Now, if I had to be in court showing it, I'd have to source it, right? But for today's purposes, I think we could take that at face value. Move on. So the wahkohtowin, that's pretty tiny lettering, but I was told when I got admitted to the bar in 2002 that by Justice Feehan, his son's being currently Justice Kevin Feehan and the former minister for the NDP party, Richard, yeah. Oh! Oh my goodness. Well, Justice Feehan, I got to tell you, you know, I really respect what he told to me when I got admitted to the bar, because he was telling me that as an Indigenous person that I had a duty. It's up to us to make sure that justice comes through in our law, and I think that was a guiding post for me, that to implement justice in our law. And he said to me, and I had a professional development coach at the time, Nellie Stone, and she told me, why don't you ask for a copy of his speech to you? And I thought, okay, I will, you know, and I requested it, and that's why I know what he said. Otherwise, I probably would have forgotten. But he said, you will learn that the word law and the word justice do not always mean the same thing, especially with what the reality we're dealing with. You serve justice within the law, but sometimes lawyers have a duty to strive through legal means to change the law to more conform to justice. And so what does that mean? To me, that's the wahkohtowin. That's what we have to do. I mean, I think that that's what we need to be implementing in the law, is the wahkohtowin. So we move on, which is the Cree law. And in this book, I have different chapters laid out. I think, you know, and then it's about the relationship, and I don't go into all of these details here, and it's a very rudimentary book, but I think, and I'm not the first to talk about this, I am not inventing this. I'm not saying things that is not really out there in the discourse or the legal discourse in a more sophisticated way that I'm saying it, but I think that it's incumbent upon me as an Indigenous lawyer who took an oath to the Queen. And a lot of people in our Indigenous community say, well, you know, you're a sellout. No, I agree that the honor of the Crown should be upheld. That's my position. And as a lawyer and legally trained, I think that it's my job, especially descending from treaty, or people who enter treaty, that we uphold that relationship. And so we have that. To me, that's the job. But there's all kinds of misunderstandings and people's opinions out there. But in order to bring clarity to the situation, I like to try to use these things with, without, or within, because I think that's going to explain the relationship. So either the relationship is going to be a healthy one, reconciliation, or it's going to be unhealthy. And there's a lot of work that needs to get done yet, that's for sure. So if we move on, and then I think, you know, holding those hands is a symbol, like, that's what that handshake is. That's what that is, right? So if we move on from that, again, small writing, but this is something I point out in the book. our wahkohtowin is worthy. And the reason how I got that title is because there was a contingency that was growing in Edmonton, or the settlers that found themselves in the Kihîw Iskwêw, which is our Cree name for Beaver Hills House. They were organizing to complain about the Indian Reserve on the south side of Edmonton. And in that organization, they had written to the Dominion of Canada and said to the Right Honorable Sir John A. Macdonald, Minister of the Interior at that time, that we were worthless Indians, worthless Indians. Now, to say that something is, what else did they say? That we were comprised of worthless Indians and the old squaws and pensioners of the company. So yeah, my great-grandfather Bateau, who was known as Charles Quinn-Gladu, worked for the Hudson's Bay Company. Yes, they did have, the family did come from Slave Lake, and before that they came from the Red River. So they did have, there was some controversy about them being here, but the fact of the matter is that they had traditional territory here and they lived as an Indian band. They did not live as homesteaders. They did not live in the same way that their Métis kin lived. That was the Métis kin choice. That was their choice, and that's how they chose to live. Our ancestors come from this Indian First Nation, this community of people who had an Indian way of life, a communal way of life, and whatever that entailed. And that's why they entered into treaty. And so this uprising was starting. And in the book, I say, well, why did they allow this to happen? Why did the Canadian government, or the Dominion of Canada, why did they? It's unknown whether even the band even knew about this complaint that was made. And it's also not known whether the Dominion of Canada, in their response to them, said, well, we have to uphold the treaty. We have to agreement of the treaty and what we promised. But I think there was a real opportunity there to mend that relationship, that knowing that this discord was going on here in Edmonton, Canada chose to ignore it. And it continues to ignore things today that they really should be entering into to help clarify matters, not to dictate, but to assist in, because they, in my mind, Canada has a duty to not only uphold its treaty relationship it entered into, but to also protect that relationship. And if there are settlers or citizens in that Dominion of Canada who are organizing to and disparaging this community across the river in a very disrespectful way, they should have upheld that treaty and brought that to the forefront. But instead, these people, who had written it was a man by the name of Belcher in this document, and he was the founder of the Northern Alberta Pioneers and Old Timers Association, which is now the Alberta Pioneer and Descendants Association, and John A. McDougall, who became the mayor of Edmonton and profited off of scrip along with Richard Secord, his clerk. So these names are still on our roads and on our buildings, and where are the Papaschase Band people? Where's my great-great-grandfather, Bateau, who built Chief Papaschase's house on the reserve, and that house being sold to the Catholic Church and used as a school after? Where are our names? Where are the names of our band? I mean, where are even the Métis names? But yet, I think Edmonton, the city of Edmonton, is taking proactive steps. And it's interesting how the name change from Oliver happened, because we were invited to participate in that by people who were non-Indigenous. The community itself did it, which is so unique, because that just doesn't happen. That's what makes it so unique, is that the community themselves asked for it and organized that. And our elder, Jerry Saddleback, was a part of that. He gave me my Cree name. Pâhpâhtêw Kihîw Iskwêw, which is a spotted eagle woman. And that community's name, with the input of the Indigenous peoples and a number of other cultures, was changed to a Cree name. I hope to see more of that. And the reason why, from what I understand, why it costs the amount it did is because the city of Edmonton had to change its structures in order to accommodate future name changes. So initially, yes, a big expense up front, but hopefully we will see a day where the names will get changed, will get accommodated. And in this area, there's a lot of them. And I know Dylan Reed has talked about this a few times already. So he's pointed it out in a video that we did with the Beaver Hills Biosphere. Yeah, so we have these two communities that are at odds, maybe, and probably the community. I don't think our community was aware of the petition to the Dominion of Canada, but they sure felt its effects. And Canada really did nothing to assuage, to make that better. Now, and another thing that they did here is they called it Edmonton. I mean, after the fort, the Hudson's Bay Company fort. Yes, the Hudson's Bay Company was allowed to keep certain tracts of land after the transfer of Rupert's Land to Canada, but there was no excuse for calling this community Edmonton. Where did, just because they wanted to, I guess, without any other recourse to any other name. Next slide. And so what I've been able to, in the journey so far, and come to learn, is that there are 7 sacred principles that have to govern our relationships, our existence. And that's respect, is the number one thing. And they're not necessarily in hierarchical order. We think of things circular and all meaning, they're all important meaning. But respect for yourself, and that is healing. And as Indigenous people, what we've been through in the trauma, the loss of identity, the genocidal acts, meaning not just necessarily meaning the killing of the physical body, but the killing of the existence of a group, that this all needs to happen at the individual level, one at a time. A lot of work ahead of us. And then there's our relationship with others. And again, my journey, I've been taught that in some ways the hard way, and have been humbled by that. And because as a lawyer, you're taught to be kind of like a gladiator and go and fight. And I taught, when I first started this out, I thought I had to be a warrior and fight. And that's not the way. Like warriors, I was told by a number of the chiefs that that's not our way. And so to learn how to be peaceful is a road that has to be taken by us. And it has been taken by our people too, right? A lot has happened. And to still come back with forgiveness and love and understanding with everything is big. The truth, it's always easiest to speak the truth. So how I look at it is respect, love, and courage. I've kind of categorized them in my own mind. And do that in everything that we do, everything, love, respect. Courage, though, not the same as fighting, but courage is not letting fear take control, even though we do have fears. And we have challenges. And then there's the other ones are truth and honesty and wisdom. And the big one that I kind of hang my hat on with honesty is better to fail with honesty than succeed by fraud. These principles can easily apply to laws, right? To development of laws. And it's not saying that it's not in the common law and the civil law, because there are elements of that obviously in there. These are human principles. And yeah. All right, yeah. Honesty. Better to fail with honesty than succeed by fraud. So the next is truth on there, and it is always easiest. Yeah. Truth, it is always easiest to speak the truth. And humility, to be humble about your accomplishment, is to be strong. Just to interject in the reading out of this, there are a lot of organizations that have developed these more fully, and that's the research that they're doing. And we're grateful for that research. There's an organization out of Saskatchewan that's doing that. We're going to need that help. We're going to need that help. Love, it is important to care for one another. And my husband's a farmer, and he knows that that's important. Like, they just know. They know that when it comes to harvest time, when one of them need help, they help each other. That's not a law. It's just something that a community has. And so that's an example of wahkohtowin, I told him. But I relate everything, because to me, these are human principles. Wisdom, with hard work and dedication will come knowledge. And courage, let nothing stand in the way of doing the right thing. And respect, give it, earn it, receive it. To me, again, these are teachings that I never ever came up with. And because the book is there, I've been approached by marketers as though I want to be the poster child for wahkohtowin, and I would never do that. Because this is not my ideas. These are not mine. They're absolutely not mine. Of course, that's on the internet. So this is what I think that's our job, is to get these back into place in a big way. And I see us doing that, though. And not us in particular, but I see other First Nations doing this. And they're putting these things into place in their laws and in their ways. There's different ways of doing this. Pipe ceremony. There's so many ceremonies, and this is what needs to, and there's things that you need to write down. There's things that you shouldn't write down. So there's law. I'm a baby in that. I'm not a lawyer in that. And that's the opposite of those teachings of wisdom is foolishness and stupidity. Bravery, the opposite is timidity, cowardice. The opposite of respect is disrespect. Honesty, dishonesty. Humility, the opposite is arrogance. I won't even try to pronounce that other word that's on there. Hubris. Okay, but love, care, the opposite is hate and indifference. Again, truth, integrity, the opposite is falseness and incongruence. And it's so important as an Indigenous community to uphold honesty, because especially when you're dealing with people's identities. And organizations or purported nations have that responsibility to ensure that they're not telling people about identities that may be not as accurate or as informative as they need to be. And I want to be careful, because a lot of identity is not just self-identification, but it's also about having to deal with Indian Act registration, in which you will never be able to unregister ever again if you ever wanted to identify as a Métis. We have to deal with all of these realities of identity. So how do I reconcile that in my own life? Let's move on. Okay. President Bill Clinton, he said on social media, people need to feel the potential to create a better tomorrow. I like that, because I think it's my job as an Indigenous person with legal training to improve this situation that we're in. I came across a young man the other day who's from the Ukraine. His dad is Russian, his mom is Polish, but he was born in the Ukraine and he identifies as Ukrainian. He says, I don't get you Canadians. You say you're Scottish, you say you're this, you're that. Where I come from, you identify with where you were born. And he happened to be in Poland on a ship carrying cargo at the time, employed when Russia attacked Ukraine. And he hasn't gone back since, but he may soon be deported and forced to fight He's only 25 years old. He's my children's friend. I just, that's a reality too that's happening in the world. And I always say, keep things real. We're dealing with things here in North America. There are a lot of good things with belonging to a democracy as well, such as Canada. I am proud of my settler heritage. I will say that. I am proud of my settler heritage. To say I'm not proud is denying my own self. However, I have the right to identify with the polity of my choice, and my blood is in this land, and that's what I identify with. And so that being said, I think we have a responsibility to make things better. And yes, there were many mistakes there, and I wouldn't even call them mistakes. I wouldn't, and I'm careful to not throw everything on settlers, but I will say this, that when you look at that image at the back there of the Treaty Number 6 relationship, I had a dream when I was younger about that image, and I didn't even know what it meant until I actually saw that handshake. But in that dream, that guy with the hat on the left was pushing, and actually if we could go back to the original slide where that image is at, that guy was pushing the Indian man with a wall across the river, and that Indian was writhing in pain, like he was, and that's what I said when I was invited to the commemorative ceremony to speak on behalf of the Papaschase at the unveiling of that Grand Chief Ermineskin, who descends from the original signatory of the Alexander Band, and so does George Quinn. And George Quinn also descends from Chief Papaschase, who was also there. That image, and pushing across, that's what happened to our band, and my mom's band, and my ancestors' band. That needs to get repaired. That needs to get fixed. That needs to happen. That's a promise that was broken. So there's the original treaty written up in handwriting. You got to love their penmanship. And but that was the original treaty card with the rights outlined. They overstepped their boundaries, Canada, when they started defining who we are and not respecting that. Not respecting that. That's a very unhealthy, sick relationship. And I'd like to say that it needs to get better. This is stolen land. It is. Until we get our land back, it remains stolen. And I'm happy to make this presentation, and I couldn't help but notice a little hatchet on the ground there. I noticed that when I was putting the slide together. I just remember the hatchet was put down. So in other words, yeah, okay. But bury the hatchet, yeah. Well. I think, just going back, and one thing I wanted to say too is that the Dominion of Canada was very proud of the fact that it didn't have to engage in any Indian wars to exist as a Dominion of Canada. They were very proud of that fact. What happened with the Red River situation is not for me to speak about. It's not my position, but I would say that there was a feeling by the Dominion of Canada that, and with the support of the imperial government, to put down law for its English citizens, and without even consulting with with people who weren't even their citizens. So when we talk about us, we did not enter Confederation. Our nation did not enter this Confederation. We did not. We entered an agreement with the Crown, and Canada was the agent. So that's my presentation. I hope I've explained how I find myself here. Well, I started out wanting to help, and next thing you know, I'm really wanting to help people who did gather. I didn't put that together. They gathered themselves, and I came along and offered to help. And here I am, and I'm honored to do what I'm doing, and it's not easy. We get a lot of challenges from others and Indigenous others as well. And it's all about identity politics, and it's not an easy road. And all we can do is just keep focusing on the positive, doing the right thing, knowing who we are, asserting our identity, our inherent right to exist. And hopefully we will get the reciprocity from Canada to recognize us as an existence, as an existence. That's what has not been done yet. So in our treaty children case, and I really want to wrap this up because I know I want to go see the hockey game.
Wrap it up now.
Okay, our Vice Chief, Len Steinhauer, right? Yeah. With our treaty child case, it's about recognizing those treaty children that we descend from that. So, and our position is that we continue to exist despite the Indian Act, what it says about us. We continue to exist. The Indian Act is a Dominion of Canada piece of legislation. I've called it other pieces of something else, but I mean, I can see I'm starting to relax now. But anyway, if you have any questions, I will certainly, yes? Oh.
Okay, I've got the mic on. I just wanted to make sure I have the mic on. So please, we do have people on Zoom. We do have people in the room with hearing difficulties. So I would ask you to raise your hand. I'll be happy to bring you the mic if you have questions. But first of all, Darlene, thank you so much.
I hope I did a good job.
I know you expressed that you were nervous about speaking, but really it didn't show, and you had so much to tell us, and we're so appreciative.
I'm honored that you invited me to speak. Thank you.
Hello. My question, I'm glad you mentioned the Indian Act right at the end there. It's regarding moving forward. Some people think a good thing would be for the government to abolish the Indian Act, and perhaps you might agree with that. I don't know. Where do you stand on moving forward and the Indian Act as it relates to everything today?
I'm a pragmatist, so I look at it as something that is not going to be so easily to dislodge. There's other more brilliant minds out there that can speak to this issue than I can, and they have been focusing on that. It's not for me to say one way or the other, because I can tell you though, from our own reality as descendants of that nation, some of us are going to qualify under the Indian Act and some aren't when we get recognized, right? And that's a reality we're going to have to contend with. Now, when you get recognized, you have to qualify under the Indian Act. That's something that you can do, but then we have the right to determine our own membership. We're supposed to have that right if we put something in place. So it all boils down to us putting something in place, having something in place to replace what is. We can't have nothing, but we need something. And so we're like, the nations are doing this work. It is really hard work because we have to reconstruct, we have to heal, we have to reconstruct, we have to rebuild. We've been decimated. Where do you start? And so this is how we started. Okay, it's a way to start. And once we get through that process, then we can get away from the Indian Act, which is an option. I'm not saying I'm not the boss here. I don't decide that. That's going to be up to people at that time. If we get that far, I believe we will. That's the job we're doing. But those people will have to decide if they opt out of the Indian Act. And there are nations who are doing that.
Thank you.
I have a question over here. Our Zoom people online, if you have a question, please raise your hand or put it in the chat, whichever is easiest for you, and we will get to you too.
Thanks, Chief Darlene. One of the things that I really appreciate about your talk tonight, I wanted to give you this feedback, is your words are congruent with your expressions, your body language, so holding your head. You're a very dynamic speaker with your mind, body, and spirit, and I resonate with that. Thank you. And my quick question is, I've often wondered, what does it mean when the words you said was get the land back? What does that mean?
Actually, EPCOR asked me that same question the other day. And there is a treaty land entitlement under the treaty that I believe the descendants of the treaty children are entitled to still. Now, there are other ways to go about getting recognized, and that's through creating a new band under Section 17 of the Indian Act. And I believe that is called a special claim process, not a specific claim, lands claim, it's special claim, and it's internal to Indian Affairs, or it's internal to CERNAC, which is a department of Indian Affairs and the Department of Indian Affairs. And I believe that there are options that are available with which I understand the Michelle Band, which is another disbanded landless band, is taking, and they're looking at creating a new band under that. Not so much saying let bygones be bygones, but can we move forward and look into the future and be future or forward looking? I like that approach personally, but whether that's the proper approach that the people want, I don't know. It's up to the people to decide how we're going to assert that treaty land entitlement. I also know that there are urban reserves. So if we have the capacity, then perhaps that's a possibility to be the government of this territory right here, to be that you send your taxes to the band will administrate the proper services, etc. I mean,
they are
yes.
getting more land around. I live on Enoch land.
Mm-hmm.
They're getting territory.
Here, Holly.
Oh, sorry. They are getting their territory.
So this is
back
Holly
now.
Teed. She sits on one of our counselors.
Thank you.
7 of 7.
So I pay taxes on land that I shouldn't even be paying taxes on, but yeah. So
Yeah, Enoch
it's-
was on our treaty pay list, and they moved on to get their own reserve. We hope to work in partnership with Enoch, because, and that's our position on that.
like a coalition.
So if you're talking about new bands, that's a possibility to create a new band. Musquatchees has got a number of different bands there, right?
Yeah.
They got 4 bands. I mean, I'm just blue skying. I don't know.
We don't know what's going to happen.
There's possibilities. So we haven't even, I was invited to speak with Canada about the concerns about Papaschase, or discuss Papaschase concerns. And a few other people were too. I'm not just saying, it was just me, but I think that they've done that with Michelle Band. They've called together a number of representatives, and they formed one council, and they're moving slowly forward with these ideas. And but I wish them all the best. We got a little bit of different background, a community, and there's a lot of overlap too. Some of us are also descendants of Michelle Band, Kihîw, et cetera. But it's what you identify with in this time for these purposes. And I think that they're on their way to getting recognized again. Yeah, but I mean, these again, and hey, what would we call that new band? Hey?
Well, we were thinking of the Beaver Hills.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we again, Beaver Hills Cree Band, Beaver Hills House Cree Band.
Yeah.
I'm just going to whatever,
Well,
but,
that's our original name, is Beaver Hills.
and I'm just being honest right now and transparent.
Yeah.
Whether there's agreement out there for that.
We
it's
just don't
another
know
story.
what's going to happen in the future.
Yeah,
Sounds like a
Oh,
familiar
what's
thing. Yeah, we'll come over here, Etta.
Thank you for this very interesting speech. I have 2 questions. I've been told that the native people do not have to account for the money they receive and what they do with it. Is that correct?
I know that we have to. I mean, but we're not a recognized Indian band, right? We're registered in the Societies Act, and one thing about societies is that in order to file your annual return, you have to file your financial statements. So we have to be transparent with membership, but
You have to, okay.
and I can't speak for other First Nations. I know that that there's I believe that they would have to. Now, whether, I don't know if people are actually, I think there's some people that challenge decisions, but yeah, I'm not, some brave people to do that too, by the way, but I don't know whether they have to account or not.
Can I ask another question? Yes. Okay, and the other question is, human beings have invaded each other's territories forever. I mean, the Romans came into Germany, and in Asia, all sorts of native people were conquered, or in England, and so on and so forth. What's the difference between what is happening here and what happened way back when?
Well, we weren't conquered. The treaty says it all, right? We're still standing up there live with a handshake. So the onus is to live with together. And how do we do that? That's all of our jobs, I think. How do we live together?
I see.
And respect each other, right?
Thank you, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I think, was it here? You had a question here? Okay.
Hi, my name is Naomi. I really appreciate learning. You said it a few times in your presentation, and you reminded me at the very end that the Papaschase did not enter Confederation, that you entered the agreement with the Crown, and that Canada was the agent. And so, for some reason, I think of the bridge in Quebec City that collapsed about 25 years ago, and many people died. And the company that built it was long gone, so nobody was held accountable. And I feel like the Crown is like that company that built that bridge. They're long gone. That's just something
Hey, and I think you're right, with the 1982 Constitution, I think we had sent I believe it was, which organization, Confederacy Treaty 6 sent a contingency out to England, speak with the Crown. Oh, they're like, oh no, that's Canada's responsibility. That's a good point. Mm-hmm.
Okay, Darlene has a question over here.
I don't know if this is possible, but can you explain taking scrip? Like,
Okay, so it was
because that led to sort of the disintegration of your band. And I've heard it used in relation to the Métis scrip as well, but I don't know if you can do that in short order.
We can quickly go into it. This wasn't, it wasn't Métis script as it was understood in Manitoba. It was Indian Act script. So, and it wasn't script as understood under the Dominion Lands Act either. It was script that was offered to induce half-breeds out of treaty, half-breeds who entered treaty. That was the wording that was used, not Métis, but half-breed. And of course, half-breed at that time meant Métis, of course, they applied it to, but that provision was Section 13 of the Indian Act, which permitted half-breeds who entered treaty, such as the Papaschase Indian Band, to take scrip, a one-time payment, to opt out of treaty. That whole scrip provision and offering was against the intent and purposes of the treaty, because the treaty was supposed to last as long as the grass grows, the sun shines, and the rivers flow. So how can the Dominion of Canada make a piece of legislation that gives people the option to get out of that. And not just as a community, it was one at a time. So when one at a time are taking that, where does that leave the community? It decimates the community. That was an act of genocide as well. Now, they were given money, and there's a lot of controversy around that too, because did they receive the money or what happened to the money? And I think that I don't want to be disrespectful to my ancestors, but in that decision, the Papaschase decision that was issued by Justice Slatter at the Court of Queen's Bench at the time, now the Court of King's Bench, there was a whole long narrative as to, well, the chief asked for it, they were begging for it, they wanted it, and I think that yes, there's evidence that they asked for it. However, our position is that when you think about what was going on with the settlers, the surrounding settlers, and some of the fines that were being issued against Bateau, for instance, for selling lumber that he had once he cleared out some land for himself and he wanted to sell it, he couldn't sell it to a settler. And when he did sell it to a settler, that settler was fined. So they lived in the face of no agreement out here. Were they starved out? That was another piece of evidence that was missing in the documents. When you file a statement of claim, you better have some evidence to prove what you're saying in there. That was part of the failure of that case. And where's your evidence that they were starved out, right? We know that they were very much pressured. You can tell. The documents, it's an inference, it's inferential that they did, where there was no agreement here for those people to even be here with those settlers and with the kind of government that was forming here, and or the municipality or with the railroad, and there was just no agreement. So to get around that, we focused on the children, because the children really didn't have a say in the matter, and they were automatically included, and they shouldn't have been. That's our position on it. It hasn't been legally proved yet, though. So going back to your question about the half-breed script, 2 years later, the Indian Act was amended. In 1885, 1886, most of the band took script. 1888, the Indian Act was amended to say, oh, and your script taking will include your children, your minor children as heads of household. So my ancestor was only 16 months old, born in India. I mean, under the Indian Act, under the definition of the Indian Act, there's no way he would even qualified for that. So that's an involuntary enfranchisement, we say. Canada's fighting us tooth and nail on that, but they've asked for an adjournment of our hearing so they can discuss with us. And that's all we can hope to get from that, because if we get a declaration that it was against the honor of the Crown, that just opens up negotiations. That's what the Manitoba Métis Federation did with the Métis children. They got a declaration that it was against the honor of the Crown, so it opens up discussions. And that's all we can hope to attain from that case, is open up discussions.
Okay, I think we've been we're going to wrap things up for now. Yeah, Lorian has something to say in a second. And I also, just before Lorian yells at me, she doesn't yell very loudly, but she will remind me this magic box that needs to go back to Elaine over there by the door. So we really appreciate you being here tonight. We also really appreciate, if you're at all possible, to help out with donations towards these programs to help us keep them going. We want to make them free and accessible to anybody who wants to come. And so if you're able to donate, that's very helpful to us. There's also a QR code on here and the information about how you can do e-transfers if you don't have any cash with you tonight, but you would like to donate. So there are many ways to donate, and I will leave the magic blue box with Elaine, your friendly greeter at the door. And I'm going to, Lorian, you had something you wanted to say. Here I come.
Just wanted to transmit from the chat, from the Zoom people, that they appreciated your talk, and thank you very much for all the work you were doing.
I wanted to clarify that with regards to your answer, The stragglers, the descendants of the stragglers would be included in that new band, if that, but we will see. That's just, I'm not talking on behalf of, as a chief, I'm just talking from my own. Even though our council has discussed those things.
So, and I guess one very last thing is to say thank you to David, our barista, who has volunteered to be in charge of the cleanup tonight. So anybody who has a few minutes and is able to stay and help get the tables away. The caterer always cleans the kitchen, so there's not a lot. There's just putting away the things that are up here and getting the room back in order.